In 2013, in a comment chain under a blog post, user Surviving Babel expressed concern with the formation and structure of an anti-universalist reactionary movement. Hierarchy is, of course, one of the central foundations of reactionary politics, but the disorganized collection of disparate blogs that constituted the neo-reactionary blogosphere was hardly conducive to practical political action. Even if the conditions were ripe for a full capital R restoration, neo-reactionaries were in no position to seize the opportunity. Surviving Babel conceptualized this scenario in a dialogue, in which the arbiter of the universe asks who speaks for universalism, and universalists respond that they all do. He then asks who speaks for reaction, and reactionaries have no answer. In answer to this question, Nick B. Steves then responded, nature, or nature's God, or both. And this was promptly picked up by Nick Land, who said, quote, nature or nature's God is an expression of special excellence extracted with subtle modification from America's Declaration of Independence. For Steves, it is something of a mantra because it enables important things to be said in contexts where otherwise an interminable argument would first need to be concluded. Primarily and strategically, it permits a consensual acceptance of natural law unobstructed by theological controversy. Agreement that reality rules need not be delayed until religious difference is resolved, and avoidance of delay, positively apprehended, is propulsion. If the arbiter of the universe merits abbreviation, nature or nature's God has a much greater case. A propeller escapes awkwardness, and singularity compacts its invocation. Nong, no, surely no. These terms tilt into non-God and precipitate a decision. The God of nature, or perhaps simply nature, is Non, whose name is the abyss of unknowing, epoch, necessarily tolerated in the acceptance of reality." Unquote. Perhaps, in making this video, I am initiating such an interminable argument. Thus we have Non, a concept intended to facilitate reasonable discourse among reactionaries of different religious persuasions, or none at all. Non is based on the conception of the universe as fundamentally ordered, its material operations governed by cause and effect relationships that are consistent and intelligible. Such a process of cause and effect may be called a law. It is only a matter of understanding it. Such laws must therefore apply to human behaviour and human society as well. Thomas Carlyle, the 19th century Scottish essayist and historian, put it eloquently when he wrote, quote, "To prosper in this world, to gain felicity, victory and improvement, either for a man or a nation, there is but one thing requisite, that the man or nation can discern what the true regulations of the universe are in regard to him and his pursuit, and can faithfully and steadfastly follow these." Unquote. So what does Non mean to reactionaries? It means a couple of things. If we are to build a new society, more prosperous and resilient than our current one, or at least one that can survive, we must ascertain what these eternal regulations are in order to follow them. Secondly, we must understand Aristotle's proclamation that man is by nature a political animal. In terms of survival, we are not so interested in the individual but of society as a whole. Non is of very little use to us if it desires us to flee from the field of battle or break the law for personal gain or preservation. As such, discussion of Non usually centres upon matters of the political. What is the optimal government structure, the best way to maintain law and order, and the limits of freedom? The will of Non is not always self-evident, and the laws that govern society and its relationship to the natural world must be deduced keenly, else we fall into error, and such errors can be devastating. Non is an impartial, yet ruthless and unforgiving judge. We would also hope that Non is predictable. But is Non fair? It depends. One can imagine Non as the ultimate retribution for the adoption of malignant and antisocial behaviours. This retribution will of course also affect innocence though. Non embodies Darwinian natural selection, and as such will optimise for the most streamlined, potent and adaptable. Societies attached to malignant or decadent behaviours will find themselves at the mercy of the wrath of Non, and only the fittest may survive. This formulation is attractive to conservatives for two reasons. Firstly, liberals tend not to think in terms of posterity or legacy. Any conception of a set of conditions for behaviour relating to more than mere hedonism is thus unattractive to the modern day left, and likewise attractive to reactionaries. Those on the right are more likely to view society as an organism, whose structure and hierarchy exist to provide necessary integrity and health for the overall body. Each cell provides a crucial purpose, but must ultimately operate only within its place and for the good of the body as a whole. Secondly, it provides conservatives with the necessary pathos to open up liberal minds to their normative claims. You can't get an ought from an is, but with none you can get pretty damn close. Even if you cannot prove that promiscuity or homosexuality are innately wrong, the belief that either might have deleterious effects on civilization is a cause for reflection. Despite what experience has shown us, even an atheist utilitarian can, in theory, agree to that. The concept of none shares some similarities with the idea of natural law, famously expounded by the theologian Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, but they are clearly conflicting concepts due to Christianity's focus on individual salvation. None centers the social over the individual, and it also centers the material over the spiritual. None is chiefly concerned with survival. Christians obviously have a high dedication to God than a temporal authority, which puts Christianity at odds with none. Aquinas' theory of natural law was based upon a set of moral truths that were based on man's relationship to God's eternal law. He described God's eternal law, writing, quote, "That law which is the supreme reason cannot be understood to be otherwise than unchangeable and eternal," unquote. Such a law was constructed in a way that was both universally applied and intelligible. Everything had a telos, a true purpose ordained by God that would provide the foundation for moral behaviour, and reason could help man understand this telos. Aquinas argued that it is in our nature to behave in a certain way, to perform certain actions and avoid others. Some of these are intuitive, like self-preservation, reproduction, the worship of God, and living in a community. However, the limits of man's reason means it is not always clear how we should live, and that is where Aquinas' concept of divine law comes in. Divine law is revealed to us only through the will of God, not human reason. Nevertheless, it provides crucial direction in order to orient ourselves towards God's eternal and natural plan for us. Finally, according to Aquinas, any law in place that contradicted natural law was illegitimate. He wrote that every human law has just so much of the nature of law as is derived from the law of nature, but if at any point it deflects from the law of nature, it is no longer a law, but a perversion of law. Theories of natural law continued to be developed by Christian philosophers and theologians, eventually including natural rights as well as laws, as eternal truths embodied in the body politic. Notable philosophers include Protestants like George Buchanan, the tutor to James I and VI of England and Scotland, and Catholics like the Jesuit Cardinal Bellarmine and Francisco Suarez, who both emphasized the natural rights for individuals to choose the nature of their government, advocating against the divine right of kings. As some of you may have intuited, it was quite a simple operation to extricate God from this whole framework, especially when natural rights become so intertwined with the matters of the political. Indeed, in the 18th century, deism became popular among Enlightenment philosophers, who abandoned divine law and other revealed truths. The key difference here between none and theories of natural laws and natural rights is that none has no respect for the individual. None, as nature, views all living things as means, not ends. Features of a human are only important so long as they contribute to the health of the body, and humans only matter so far as they contribute to society. We know it is the will of none to organize into societies, but with natural law, the emphasis is placed on the individual and society's relationship with God, which is paramount. A God who demands holiness, not a commitment to theoretically optimized behavior. While eternal laws exist, the principles that derive from it are intimately connected with God's plan. As such, actions like abortion are not acceptable, even if they can be described in some way as natural. Theories of natural rights derive from God, and as such, may run counter to the existing social organization. Whereas Gnon requires society to be streamlined and constantly improving, there might be situations in which a good Christian cannot accede to such a compulsion. Examples of this abound in history, but include the 1606 Oath of Allegiance in England, in which James I enacted a law requiring Catholics to swear total allegiance to a Protestant monarch, rejecting papal deposing power. Many films and novels integrate concepts of fate, destiny, morality, and social change, but none are so pertinent to our discussion here than the film No Country for Old Men, written by Cormac McCarthy and adapted for film by the Coen brothers. Major spoilers ahead. The film follows Llewellyn Moss, a welder and hunter in Texas, who is pursued by the ruthless and unstoppable Anton Chigurh after he steals a briefcase full of cash from a drug deal gone wrong. Always a few steps behind, Sheriff Tom Bell investigates the pursuit in order to bring Chigurh to justice and retrieve the money from Moss. Anton Chigurh is an almost perfect characterization of Gnon. He is unstoppable and is almost always on the move. Every action he takes serves a purpose and is executed with the fine-tuned precision of a professional. His skill set is limitless, whether he is reciting his homicidal entry into the motel room, applying medicines, or causing a distraction. He always knows the optimal course of action and executes it perfectly. Like a force of nature, Chigurh focuses on his goal with a single-minded intensity. He kills the man who hired Carson Wells for giving the Mexicans a transponder to help track Llewellyn.
He gave the Mexicans a receiver.
He felt that the more people looking...
That's foolish. You pick the one right tool.
Chigurh's coin represents the man himself, the one right tool that he uses repeatedly to unscrew ventilation grates and to decide the fate of his victims who are caught in the crossfire between Chigurh and his target, exacting retribution due to the corruption and crime that plagues the county. Carson Wells was hired to track down Chigurh, but ended up hunted himself. Before meeting his fate, Wells described Chigurh as a man with principles.
Oh, no, you don't understand. You can't make a deal with him. Even if you gave him the money back, he'd still kill you just for inconveniencing him. He's a peculiar man. Might even say he has principles that transcend money or drugs or anything like that. He's not like you. Yeah, he's not even like me.
But such principles are not arbitrary. Before Chigurh kills Wells, he asks him,
If the rule you followed brought you to this, of what use was the rule?
Chigurh, like Gnon, exists to strip away the deleterious ideas and wasteful practices of our society, punishing those whose lifestyles run counter to natural law. He exploits the simple, unthinking man at the start of the film, who literally presents himself to be executed. Such an ignorant action gets himself killed, and this represents how only man's rational faculties, when engaged with the world around him, can allow him to live according to the laws of nature. Sheriff Bell and Carson Wells both claim to not understand Chigurh, but perhaps they merely don't want to understand. Wells, after all, is only in it for the money, a motive so worthless and pathetic in the face of defeat. Chigurh cannot help but smirk when Wells offers him cash in return for his life. Sheriff Bell, on the other hand, is a coward.
He's just a goddamn homicidal lunatic yet, Tom.
I'm not sure he's a lunatic.
Yeah, well, what would you call him?
Yeah, sometimes I think he's pretty much a ghost.
He's real, all right.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, all of that over at the Eagle Hotel? Just beyond everything.
Yeah. Got some hard bark on him.
Well, that don't hardly say it. He shoots a desk clerk one day, walks right back in the next, and shoots a retired Army colonel.
It's hard to believe.
Just strolls right back into a crime scene. Now, who'd do such a thing? How do you defend against it?
Look at him,
Yeah.
sitting down in his car,
trip, Ed, Tom.
eyes forward,
Sorry we couldn't help
terrified,
you, boys.
as Roscoe describes the bloodthirsty exploits of Chigurh. When he is finally presented with the very real threat of Shiger at the scene of Moss's death, he is utterly unwilling to face him. He opens the door carelessly, dangling his pistol at his waist. So much the better for him that Shiger has slipped away, like a ghost. Ignorance, greed, and cowardice. Such behaviours are not only repulsive, but, for these three characters, fatal. People like Wells and Bell are reluctant to understand Shiger because they don't want to, because they are too afraid to confront the reality that such terrifying circumstances necessitate strength and virtue, traits they don't possess. Shiger is the scourge of Gnon, punishing these characters for their weakness. Bell's dream of a pure and simpler past is over, and he must be willing to confront the demons of his time, the lawlessness, the Mexican drug dealers, and the psychopathic tendencies of men like Anton Shiger. But if he doesn't, him and his community will be destroyed. Shiger is the threat that Sheriff Bell needs to defeat, and sets the standard that he is unable to live up to. In the end of the film, Shiger wins. He retrieves the money and disappears. Wells and Moss lie dead, and Bell retires, having met his match. But there's more to this story. Yes, both Wells and Bell, even the Mexicans that Shiger kills at the motel, were morally compromised. But Llewellyn Moss and Carla Jean, they were just normal people. And wait, it was the going back to give the dying man water that identified Moss in the first place, a kindness it feels sort of wrong to cast as immoral. Furthermore, Moss's virtues mirrored the weaknesses we just went over. He was smart, brave, and he wasn't motivated by petty greed, and yet he still perished. If he had taken up the attractive lady's offer of beer, he would never have been caught in his room. Is that it? I mean, it seems like Moss is being punished for acting morally. Hang on, this whole thing makes no sense. Take the coin toss. It's just chaos. No, something's not right. If submitting to Non's laws means leaving life up to chance, what's the point? What better to illustrate my point here than this? After he kills Jean, Shiger drives away. Before his eyes, a kaleidoscopic range of phantasmal images played, all of them dissolving at intervals into the picture of a vast, unplumbed abyss of night, wherein whirled suns and worlds of an even profounder blackness. He thought of the ancient legends of ultimate chaos, at whose centre sprawls the blind idiot god, Azathoth, lord of all things, encircled by his flopping horde of mindless and amorphous dancers, and lulled by the thin, monotonous piping of a demoniac flute held in nameless paws. These are the words of H.P. Lovecraft in the short story The Haunter of the Dark. Lovecraft was an early 20th century horror author, famous for such stories as The Mountains of Madness, The Call of Cthulhu, and The Shadow over Innsmouth. I will here read some excerpts of his. An atheist and a pessimist, Lovecraft had a bleak view of humanity's place in the universe. Lovecraft based all of his fictions, quote, on the fundamental premise that common human laws and interests and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large, unquote. For the universe is, quote, a wholly purposeless and essentially temporary incident in the ceaseless and boundless rearrangements of electrons, atoms, and molecules, which constitute the blind but regular mechanical patterns of cosmic activity. Our human race is only a trivial incident in the history of creation. It is of no more importance in the annals of eternity and infinity than is the child snowman in the annals of terrestrial tribes and nations, unquote. According to Lovecraft, there is no God to punish us for excess, nor karma to reward good and punish bad behaviour. In conclusion, the satisfaction of our own emotions is the one solid thing which we can ever get out of life. Lovecraft may have been pessimistic about lasting human accomplishment, but he still believed we should make life as pleasant as possible while there were still humans to experience it. Quote, to enjoy tranquility and to promote tranquility in others, he said, is the most enduring of delights. Such was the doctrine of Epicurus, the leading ethical philosopher of the world. He who is kind, helpful, and patient with his fellow sufferers adds as truly to the world's combined fund of tranquility as he who, with greater endowments, promotes the birth of empires or advances the knowledge and civilization of mankind. Thus, no man of philosophical caste, however circumscribed by poverty or retarded by ailment, need feel himself superfluous, so long as he holds the power to improve the spirit of others." Unquote. What constitutes such goods, however, is steeped in culture, depending on ancestry, chronology, geography, nationality, and individual temperament. One of the highest Epicurean pleasures, philosophic and aesthetic expansion, could be achieved through the protection of, quote, "those things of beauty which are of real value because they involve actual sense impressions rather than vapid theories. Equality is a joke, but a great abbey or cathedral covered with moss is a poignant reality. It is for us to safeguard and preserve the conditions which produce great abbeys and palaces and picturesque walled towns, and vivid skylines of steeples and domes, and luxurious tapestries, and fascinating books, paintings, and statuary, and colossal organs, and noble music, and dramatic deeds on embattled fields. These are all there is of life. Take them away, and we have nothing which a man of taste or spirit would care to live for. Take them away, and our poets have nothing to sing, our dreamers have nothing to dream about." Unquote. Lovecraft further argues for the importance of defending such pleasures. Quote, "Although meaning nothing in the cosmos as a whole, mankind obviously means a good deal to itself. Therefore, it must be regulated by customs which shall ensure, for its own benefit, the full development of its various accidental potentialities." Unquote. By accidental potentialities, he means our ability to recognize beauty, art, and logic. These are, according to Lovecraft, anthropocentric concepts given meaning by us, but therefore no less meaningful. Quote, "The value of mankind regarding beauty and fineness mean absolutely nothing to the blind gods of the ultimate abyss, to whom all things are alike. And those gods, in their brainless, sightless grinding of the eternal mill, may sometimes accidentally favour and sometimes accidentally frustrate what we locally, arbitrarily, and accidentally happen to esteem as beauty and fineness." Unquote. But wait, surely the gods don't accidentally favour anything. There must be a system, a law of Darwinian selection which regulates. Lovecraft believed that truth was the ultimate sacred value, and nothing, not even the protective prohibitions of tradition, should interfere with the scientific pursuit of knowledge. Quote, "Tradition is virtually the only standard or value or criterion of interest and direction, purpose, illusion that we have in the world of feeling, action, and art. There it is supreme. But in the world of thought and reality, it is a perfectly meaningless thing, and has no effect except to place obstacles in the way of the discovery of truth. When we wish to obtain any actual knowledge of the cosmos and its properties, we must at once put out of our heads all the accumulated notions concerning such things which miscellaneous experience and slipshod inheritance have blindly saddled upon us." Unquote. He concludes that an opinion changed by force is an opinion not really changed at all. No real civilization wishes to change anyone's opinion except through rational arguments. Nevertheless, Lovecraft was realistic. He expressed his support for authoritarian social orders which would be more capable of preserving, quote, "conditions favourable to the growth of beautiful things, imposing palaces, beautiful cities, elegant literature, reposeful art and music, and a physically select human type," unquote. Believing that, quote, "only by a bold repudiation of the liberal pose and the progress illusion can we get the sort of authoritative social and political control which alone produces things which make life worth living. I really wish this generation did no less, so that it might return to the unperplexed tranquillity of former times, the tranquillity of simple loyalty to king and church, amidst which those idyllic figures, the country squire and the parish vicar, could regain some of their olden significance. Certainly the acquiescent, dogmatic, and well-ordered life of simple ages had, with all its glaring defects, a fundamental harmony and good taste that we seek in vain amidst the excesses of that jazz period, to which the invention of complex machinery and the spread of democratic fallacies have jointly given birth. Thus I am, whilst utterly radical in such departments of sheer intellect as science and philosophy, thoroughly and cynically conservative, even reactionary, in social and political matters, a Tory, Tsarist, Junker, patrician, fascist, oligarchist, nationalist, militarist, and whatever else of the sort you can find in Webster's dictionary or Roget's Thesaurus." End quote. This is not to give a full exposition of Lovecraft's thought, which is far more nuanced, complex, and fascinating than is elucidated here, but to ignore his atheistic hedonism, his defense of truth and beauty in the face of overwhelming mendacity, mediocrity, and degeneration is highly compelling. But there is something else here too. Lovecraft's atheistic conception of the universe posits the machinations of the universe as totally alien, or at least indifferent to us. The laws of an external nature do not reflect man's own nature or coincide with his teleology. If that were true, it would mean that our relationship to the universe is not defined by order but by disorder. Following natural law leads us not to civilization, but into chaos. If none rewards merely adaptive behavior, what then of the culture we hold to be priceless, the art and music that seems not so much to cynically provide some advantage to its listeners, but a sense of awe and appreciation? What of sacred values that, if plunged back into the state of nature, we would be forced to abandon? And what about truth? It surely seems as though we are currently living in a society in which truth has been left by the wayside. Are such values the maladaptive ideas that we are supposed to abandon? Is that what Gnon optimizes for? David Hume wrote, quote, "Indulge your passion for science, says nature, but let your science be human, and such as may have a direct reference to action in society. Be a philosopher, but, amidst all your philosophy, be still a man." Unquote. If any person were to look at the political situation today, would they not imagine nature saying, "Be still a progressive"? It certainly seems as though progressivism is the most successful and adaptive idea, at least of the last century. But does following the will of none mean adopting whatever contemporary ideology grants the most social capital or political advantage? On the individual level, there are many incentives to defect or undermine society. Cheating is far easier than working. Looting is far easier than building. But isn't this just obfuscation? I mean, we've already discussed that none is interested in group selection, which supersedes the individual. Surely there are more obvious universal regulations that can be abided by as a society. Society as a whole cannot subvert itself. Robert Filmer, writing in Patriarcha, elucidates this point elegantly. Quote, "It is the multitude of people and the abundance of their riches which are the only strength and glory of every prince. The bodies of his subjects do him service in war, and their goods supply his present wants. Therefore, if not out of affection to his people, yet out of a natural love to himself, every tyrant desires to preserve the lives and protect the goods of his subjects, which cannot be done but by justice, and if it be not done, the prince's loss is the greatest. On the contrary, in a popular state, every man knows the public good doth not depend wholly on his care, but the commonwealth may well enough be governed by others, though he tend only to his private benefit. He never takes the public to be his own business. Thus, as in a family, where one office is to be done by many servants, one looks upon another, and every one leaves the business for his fellow until it is quite neglected by all." Unquote. But even a head of state cannot safeguard his or her people against anarchy or chaos. Contemporary geopolitics is in a state of anarchy, or at least polyarchy, and as such, despite the ideal state of government existing according to certain principles, there will always be the incentive to undermine those principles in the conflict of interest between different nations. One modern example is the incentive to democratize and liberalize under the pressure of global powers like the United States, NATO, and the European Union, which can outweigh the incentives to promote a traditional reactionary vision of society, even if they might offer a greater chance of social preservation in theory. And as Lovecraft has shown, even a healthy, traditional society infringes on the ideals of truth and honesty. This is none, and it will discard any principle, value, or rule that does not immediately grant a competitive advantage. Finally, we have enough context to approach a debate that occurred between the neo-reactionary blog More Right and the rationalist blog Slate Star Codex. In a post titled "Capturing None," this channel's namesake, the author wrote that the Lovecraftian cosmic perspective is the horrifying realization that the interests of a natural emergent non overall do not coincide with those of man. He lists 4 semi-distinct sub-processes of non, each anthropomorphized as godlike entities. The first is Azathoth, the blind idiot alien god, quote, who shapes our biological nature and guides our genetic destiny according to who lives and who dies. The telos of evolution is not progress to more advanced forms. It will ruthlessly twist organisms for a few points of inclusive genetic fitness and abandon important features of an organism, e.g. our intelligence, as soon as they stop being critical to fertility, unquote. Next is Cthulhu, quote, the tendency for popular forms to be the ones most able to propagate themselves by capturing transmission institutions and getting repeated. Contrary to popular opinion, the marketplace of ideas does not select for truth and good, but virulence. Truth-good selection only happens if the mass idea propagation systems structurally favour truth and good, which they often do not. The current result being that Cthulhu may swim slowly, but he only swims left. Unquote. Penultimately, Mammon, quote, capitalism, techno-economical optimization, production. When a form succeeds by exploiting a technological resource use opportunity, that is Mammon at work. Thus we have an efficient and recycling biological ecosystem, and human capitalism has driven the creation of great works of technology. But Mammon will ruthlessly recycle forms not contributing to the cutting edge of production, including us if it comes to that, unquote. And finally, Ares, god of war, quote, agricultural civilization won not because it was better in our sense, but because 100 malnourished toothless peasants with sticks beats one of even the healthiest and best trained tribal warriors. War is computation with weapons, and the truth thus revealed is simply which socio-military group is stronger, unquote. Yes, disobeying the will of none will earn his wrath, military defeat, enslavement, anarchy, crime, injustice, etc., but submission to the invisible hand of the market, optimizing only for birth rates, and promoting adaptive fictions rejects man's unique telos. Quote, when he is allowed the security to act and the clarity to reason out the consequences of his actions, when unafflicted by coordination problems and unthreatened by superior forces, able to act as a gardener rather than just another subject of the law of the jungle, he tends to build and guide a wonderful world for himself. He tends to favor good things and avoid bad, to create secure civilizations with polished sidewalks, beautiful art, happy families, and glorious adventures, unquote. And as for the future, will it, quote, be ruled by the usual 4 horsemen of Non for a future of meaningless gleaning techno-progress burning the cosmos, or a future of dysgenic, insane, hungry, and bloody dark ages? Or will the telos of man prevail for a future of meaningful art, science, spirituality, and greatness? Instead of the destructive reign of evolution and the sexual market, we would be better off with deliberate and conservative patriarchy and eugenics driven by the judgment of man within the constraints set by Non. Instead of a marketplace of ideas that more resembles a festering petri dish, breeding superbugs, a rational theocracy. Instead of unhinged techno-commercial exploitation or naive neglect of economics, a careful bottling of the productive economic dynamic and planning for a controlled techno-singularity. Instead of politics and chaos, a strong hierarchical order with martial sovereignty. Thus we arrive at neo-reaction and the Dark Enlightenment, wherein Enlightenment science and ambition combine with reactionary knowledge and self-identity towards the project of civilization. This need not be done globally. We may only be able to carve out a small walled garden for ourselves, but make no mistake, even if only locally, the project of civilization is to capture Non, unquote. Scott Alexander responded to this blog post in his essay, Meditations on Moloch. He restated the Lovecraftian argument that ultimately all civilizations are insignificant, so all actions to preserve them are also insignificant. He nevertheless lacks Lovecraft's belief that civilization is worth preserving, due to its utilitarian benefit, presumably arguing that whatever the effect of antisocial behavior by individuals is on civilization is irrelevant, because the people acting irresponsibly will all be dead, and as such, there is no valid imperative for them to be responsible. A particularly ugly view, but it is impossible to descend into an ethical debate here. And regardless, our focus here is on the best way to preserve society. Anyway, Scott proposes we attempt to balance sacrificing to Gnon and preserving certain sacred human values. But this is not a demonstrably different idea to what was proposed in Capturing Gnon. He also impugns the possibility, or even the supposed benefits, of capturing Gnon, claiming that only until humanity is technologically advanced enough to build a superhuman AI god will we be able to reorient society into anything worth living in. Anything up until that point would be too authoritarian for his liking. At some point, matters will come to a head, he promises. This is just his liberal proclivities speaking, but transhumanism is certainly an interesting idea, and one I'm not necessarily opposed to. But what of the meantime? Scott says, quote, "Suppose you make your walled garden, you keep out all of the dangerous memes, you subordinate capitalism to human interests, you ban stupid bioweapons research, you definitely don't research nanotechnology or strong AI. Everyone outside doesn't do those things. And so the only question is whether you'll be destroyed by foreign diseases, foreign memes, foreign armies, foreign economic competition, or foreign existential catastrophes. As foreigners compete with you, and there's no wall high enough to block all competition, you have a couple of choices. You can get out-competed and destroyed, you can join in the race to the bottom, or you can invest more and more civilizational resources into building your wall, whatever that is in a non-metaphorical way, and protecting yourself." Unquote. Sheriff Tom Bell never actually sees Anton Chigurh. In fact, Llewellyn Moss never actually sees Chigurh face to face. During their showdown, he observes his shadow through the crack under the door. He catches the flash of his muzzle in his rearview mirror and sees him dive for cover after being shot with Moss's shotgun, but he limps away before Moss can identify him. When Wells sees him in the hospital, Moss claims that he has in fact seen Chigurh, but in the screenplay he actually says, "I've seen him, sort of," further supporting the idea that Chigurh's physical form is something illusory and ghost-like. When Sheriff Bell returns to the scene of Moss's death, he notices the door lock has been blown out. Chigurh has been here. The sheriff opens the door, and Chigurh has vanished. The window is locked, which indicates that Chigurh did not escape through it. Instead, he vanished, because Chigurh is not a physical, tangible threat. He is not even a real person. He is merely a reflection of Sheriff Bell's ultimate fear, the fear that things are getting worse and there is nothing he can do about it. If you think this is ridiculous, remember that the story is being told by Sheriff Bell, and as such, the events as told within the film should not be taken as fact.
The crime you see now, it's hard to even take its measure. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I always knew you had to be willing to die to even do this job. But I don't want to push my chips forward and go out and meet something I don't understand. A man would have to put his soul at hazard. You'd have to say, okay. I'll be part of this world.
Everyone involved in the story who ever crossed Chigurh is dead. Yes, there were a few civilians, including the man at the petrol station, but listen to what he says before he leaves.
Well done. Don't put it in your pocket, sir. Don't put it in your pocket. It's your lucky quarter.
Where you want me to put it?
Anywhere not in your pocket. Or it'll get mixed in with the others and become just a coin. Which it is.
And when Sheriff Bell and his goofy sidekick find traces of Shiger, Bell reminds Wendell just how little they have to go on.
Still sweating.
Oh, Sheriff! We just missed him! We gotta circulate this on radio.
All right. Well, what do we circulate? Looking for a man who has recently drunk milk?
Like the coin, Shiger will slip back into society and become just another man in the nameless, faceless mass of potential suspects that Sheriff Bell has no way of identifying in modern impersonal society. So, Bell really has no indication that this man, Shiger, ever really existed. Just a string of murders, shot-out locks, and a coin. The only man Bell ever talks to about Shiger, whom he doesn't know by name, is another sheriff, Sheriff Roscoe, an old Texas conservative who similarly expresses dismay at the current state of society.
Though they was leaving in a hurry.
Oh, it's all the goddamn money, Ed Tom. Money and the drugs. It's just goddamn beyond everything. What's it mean? What's it leading to? You know, if you'd have told me 20 years ago I'd see children walking the streets of our Texas towns with green hair, bones in their noses, I just flat out wouldn't have believed you.
Signs and wonders. But I think once you quit hearing sir and ma'am, the rest is soon to follow.
Oh, it's the tide. It's the dismal tide. It is not the one thing.
Not the one thing.
The impersonal nature of Shiger is represented in the dark clouds and rolling thunder that gather behind Moss, lightning cracking in spurts of electric power, foreshadowing his doom. Shiger is simply chaos, an unassailable terror. Sheriff Bell holds a position of authority in his community. He knows Moss by name and even something of his character. Both his father and his grandfather were sheriffs too, their duty and commitment to the public order passed down to him.
Hard to believe. Grandfather was a lawman. Father, too. Me and him were sheriffs at the same time, him up in Plano and me out here. I think he's pretty proud of that. I know I was.
Bell's mindset is deeply conservative. He is rooted to the soil, to his profession by blood, and to his community through his profession. He represents order, an order that is slowly being eroded by the forces of chaos, violence, vulgarity, and nihilism. Kids don't say sir or ma'am anymore, psychopaths kill in cold blood, and the influence of Mexican drug cartels from across the border threatens the peace. And Sheriff Bell cannot understand why this is happening or how to counter it. Anton Shiger embodies this fear. A psychopathic killer, his name, accent, and appearance is strange and foreign. He kills without remorse or hesitation. He is totally unfathomable. His motives a mystery, and what drives him seems to be purely deterministic forces.
I got here the same way the coin did.
A man with no apparent free will of his own, his behaviour is determined by fate or something more sinister. All of this, of course, is a reflection of Bell's fear of the strange, the foreign, and that which he doesn't understand.
What you got ain't nothing new. This country's hard on people. You can't stop what's coming. It ain't all waiting on you. That's vanity.
Ellis, Bell's cousin, reminds Bell that there was never a peaceful golden age that he imagines. While Ellis is correct, the problems we see in the film have been exacerbated by modern living conditions. Technological advances, the growth of urbanism, population expansion, and globalization have made it harder for Bell and us to preserve order, a sense of belonging and of identity, and culture. In fact, it appears that the one thing he is right about is the deterministic and degenerative nature of this change. He knows that what is happening is larger than some Mexican cartel, rapacious businessmen, or disrespectful youths, because at this point it isn't because of any one person's free will that society has changed so much. It is rather the 4 horsemen of Gnon who have begun their slow siege on civilization. To him, and I think he's right, this is the tide of modernity, in which social relationships are increasingly impersonal and fragmentary. Obviously, there were deliberate actions taken by powerful individuals that put such forces in motion, but now we are living within the fallout. Capital motivates men and women to kill and lie, and foreign cultures and peoples bring crime and fear, and there is very little one man, one group, or one movement can do about it. This is why all throughout the film, it seems that Moss is punished for his good deeds. When he returns to give the dying Mexican water, he is identified by the cartel, and this prompts Shiger to pursue him. When an attractive lady offers him beer, he refuses, and as such he is killed in his own motel room. The forces of chaos are tempting, but even when Moss makes the morally correct choice, he is punished. Because Gnon is just and fair, but his justice is not a human justice. It is chaos, but an intelligible chaos, one that deceives us into recognizing principles and patterns. Such patterns, like those governing the coin toss, exist, but following them, like Shiger does, threatens to strip us of everything that makes us human, and everything that makes a civilization special. So, is that it? Are the forces of nature insurmountable? No. In the final scene, Shiger is driving when he is suddenly struck by another driver who is illegally crossing a junction. While Shiger has been hurt before, in the gunfight, he was at least in control of that situation. Gunshot wounds are, after all, an occupational hazard for Shiger. But here, he is almost taken out by pure chance, managing to flee only because of the generosity of 2 young boys. Shiger is a force of nature, a force of chaos, and will return to chaos, without a single mark of his presence. The stronger he grows, the more chaos he sows, and the less generosity there will be in the world, and fewer boys to offer him help when he needs it. Already they bicker over splitting Shiger's money. Returning to Scott Alexander's essay, he describes his pessimistic attitude towards the project of civilization. Quote, Warg talks about trying to avoid a future of meaningless, gleaming techno-progress burning the cosmos. Do you really think your walled garden will be able to ride this out? Is it part of the cosmos? Yeah, you're kind of screwed. Unquote. But we're not screwed, Scott. Those who sacrifice what is precious for the pursuit of power eventually run out of things to sacrifice. Those who embrace the chaos will reap what they sow, and will see their own societies destroyed under the weight of greed, corruption, and nihilism, and they will have no generous and charitable assistance from the rest. Heaping more tinder onto the fire might cause a more terrifying flame, but it will burn itself out all the faster. It's just a matter of retaining our humanity and withstanding the heat. There might be some who question whether this is a rejection of nature at all. Perhaps Gnon is merely encouraging such prudent behaviour, but that's not quite it. Do we account for our society's merits through mere expedient behaviour? This is the crux of the dispute here. Truth, justice, and beauty are all rejected or corrupted by today's society, and none of these ideals are selected for in any process of natural selection, and none will never select for them either. We must bring about the conditions to preserve all that we hold sacred. They must be brought about paternally by human care and human government. Ever since the first man delineated a border between his property and the outside world, he decided to orient the forces of nature to his own benefit. Instead of a thicket of inedible weeds and wild grasses, a cultivated patch of nutrition. Our ability to reconfigure the world around us defines us as humans. while other animals do this too to a smaller extent, think beaver dams and animals' nests, none are so progressively oriented as us. Man's reach exceeds his grasp, and he is constantly striving to tame and dominate nature. Instead of a world ruled by random chance, by famine, flood, and migration, man sought to create sustainable growth, prosperity, and settlement. Where nature is ruled by injustice, with the big terrorizing the small, parasites feeding on the productive, and perpetual and unaccountable ruthless cruelty, man sought to create a life and a society ruled by order, justice, honesty, and trust. Instead of war drums and orchestra, a society in which art, literature, physics, mathematics, and astronomy could be appreciated not as means, but as human ends. A society governed by faith and truth, not merely adaptive social zeitgeists. All human civilization is in defiance of Gnon, but we seem to have forgotten what that means. The left do not believe in any natural order, no retribution for their sin and decadence, or even kindness, or a retribution they are too careless to worry about. After all, they shall not be the ones to suffer for it. On the right, there are many new reactionaries and conservatives who believe in adopting adaptive behaviours purely for the sake of a theoretical Darwinian advantage in the battle of group selection. Such an attitude tends to orient one's politics around being based. Instead of those precious values that conservative policies seek to protect, they seem far too concerned with the policies themselves. This is a very dark path indeed. Neither of these attitudes is remotely human, and are both misguided at best and repulsive at worst. But wherever there is humanity, there is hope, and regardless of what the future holds, those men who create a future in which a lovely society can be enjoyed, those men who can capture Gnon, will surely be vindicated in the greater societies to come.